Long before the clang of coins echoed through bustling marketplaces, gold shimmered in the hands of ancient artisans and rulers, its luster captivating humanity for millennia. Archaeological evidence reaches back as far as 40,000 years before Christ, hinting at gold's early allure, though the first solid proof of human interaction with gold appears in ancient Egypt around 3,000 years before Christ. In these early civilizations, gold was not yet the universal symbol of commerce it would become, but it already played a central role in mythology, wealth, and daily life. Egyptians mastered the art of smelting and alloying gold, crafting exquisite jewelry and ritual objects that adorned both the elite and the divine. They even established some of the first known gold-to-silver value ratios, treating gold as a symbol of status and permanence rather than merely a tool of barter. As centuries passed, gold's story became intertwined with the rise and fall of empires. The Egyptians, renowned for their innovation, learned to refine gold and create standardized rings that served as early money for trade. These rings were a far cry from the coins we know today, but their use marked one of the first instances of gold being shaped not just for beauty, but for exchange. Meanwhile, in the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, the Sumerians selected silver as their primary standard of value by around 2,700 years before Christ, yet gold remained a prized commodity, its rarity and luster setting it apart. Across continents, gold's role in society evolved in parallel. In Mesoamerica, China, India, Greece, and Rome, gold found expression in jewelry, art, and eventually coins. The Greeks and Romans, inheriting and refining the practices of earlier civilizations, saw gold as both a currency and a marker of social standing. Yet it was not until the rise of Lydia, a kingdom in western Anatolia, that gold would take on a revolutionary new form. Around the 7th to 6th century before Christ, Lydian merchants and rulers began using gold as a medium of exchange. The true watershed moment arrived under King Croesus of Lydia, who, around 550 years before Christ, oversaw the striking of the first standardized gold coins. These coins, known as crucids, were carefully refined bimetallic pieces that quickly gained wide acceptance. Unlike the gold rings and nuggets that preceded them, these coins were easily portable, divisible, and crucially stamped to verify their authenticity. Their introduction simplified transactions and fueled commerce, freeing trade from the uncertainties of weighing and assaying raw metal with each exchange. The Lydian innovation rippled outward. Neighboring empires, recognizing the utility of standardized coinage, swiftly adopted and adapted the idea. The Persians, after conquering Lydia, began producing their own gold coins, and soon the Greeks and Romans followed suit. For the Greeks, gold coins became an essential part of their monetary systems, used in both local markets and the wider Mediterranean trade networks. The Romans, ever practical and systematic, expanded the use of gold coinage throughout their sprawling empire. Roman engineers even developed advanced hydraulic mining techniques, increasing gold production and making coins more widely available. As Roman power grew, so did the circulation of gold coins, which were now used not just for grand political tribute or religious offerings, but for significant transactions across continents. While Europe and the Near East saw the proliferation of gold coins, other regions followed different paths. In ancient China, the story of money took a distinctive turn. By the Han Dynasty around 140 years before Christ, the Chinese began to use paper currency, a practical innovation given the vast distances and the weight of metal coins. This use of paper money reached new heights during the Tang Dynasty, between 618 and 907 years after Christ. Yet even here, gold retained its role as a store of wealth and a symbol of prestige. In the Chinese state of Chu, gold coins were circulating by around 500 AD, demonstrating that the metal's appeal was truly global. Across these ancient societies, the reasons for gold's appeal as a monetary material become clear. Gold is rare, yet not so rare as to be impractical for coinage. Its durability ensures that coins do not rust or corrode, allowing them to endure over generations. Gold's malleability makes it easy to shape and stamp, while its visual appeal, its unmistakable gleam, sets it apart from other metals. Unlike iron or copper, gold is soft enough that coins can be authenticated by touch, but hard enough to resist everyday wear. Its divisibility allows for coins of varying denominations, facilitating both grand and modest exchanges. As trade routes stretched across continents, gold's role grew ever more central. During the Bronze Age and Middle Ages, gold was often reserved for major transactions, political tributes, religious offerings, and the highest levels of commerce. Even as silver and other metals circulated among the common people, gold was the currency of the powerful. In Egypt and Rome, gold was associated with the divine, its permanence and beauty linked to eternity itself. The durability and scarcity of gold, combined with its ability to be divided and transported, made it uniquely suitable as a foundation for monetary systems. The spread of gold coinage did not happen overnight, nor did it follow a single uniform path. Coins produced in different regions were not always standardized in weight or purity, which could complicate trade between kingdoms. Nonetheless, the very act of stamping coins, of marking them as official, helped build trust and simplify exchange. Over time, as advances in mining and minting technology made gold coins more accessible, their use broadened from elite circles to wider swaths of society. By the time of the Roman Empire, gold coins had become integral to the functioning of economies across Europe, North Africa, and Western Asia. Roman administration and conquest brought gold coinage to new provinces, helping bind the empire together economically. The reliability and recognizability of gold coins facilitated long-distance trade, allowing merchants to traverse routes stretching from Britain to the Middle East and beyond. Even so, gold's role was rarely exclusive. Silver and bronze coins often circulated alongside gold, especially for smaller transactions. But gold remained the standard for high-value exchanges and was often hoarded by rulers and states as a reserve of wealth and power. Over the centuries, the concept of storing gold in reserves rather than carrying it in daily transactions began to take hold. As currency systems developed, especially in later eras, gold would serve as the backing for paper money, a guarantee of value that people could trust. Throughout history, gold's unique attributes shaped not only economies, but also cultures and beliefs. It was seen as both a practical tool and a mystical substance, endowed with meaning far beyond its physical properties. Its association with royalty, divinity, and eternity elevated gold above other forms of wealth, making it the ultimate symbol of status and security. The legacy of gold as a standard of value was set long before the rise of modern finance. By the 7th to 6th century BCE, with the Lydians minting gold coins, the stage was set for gold's ascent as the foundation of monetary systems across the known world. In Egypt and Rome, gold's connection to the eternal ensured its place in both temples and treasuries, and across continents, from the Americas to Asia, gold's enduring luster drew the attention of rulers, merchants, and ordinary people alike. As the centuries rolled on, the practicalities of trade and the ambitions of empires would push monetary systems to evolve. The adoption of paper currency in China, for example, demonstrated that societies could innovate beyond metal coins for convenience and efficiency. Yet even as new forms of money emerged, gold retained its central role as a store of value and a standard against which other currencies were measured. By the early modern period, documents from Britain detailed the continued rise of gold coinage, as well as the legal and technological developments that would lead to the formalization of the gold standard in the centuries to come. But at its heart, the story of gold as money is a story of human ingenuity, desire, and trust, a recognition that some things, by their very nature, hold lasting value. Gold's journey from the riverbeds of ancient Egypt to the minting presses of Lydia and onward to the bustling markets of Rome and the imperial halls of China reveals a pattern shaped by both necessity and reverence. Its rarity ensured it would never be commonplace. Its beauty made it desirable. Its physical properties made it practical. These qualities, combined with centuries of cultural meaning, transformed gold from a precious metal into the ultimate standard of wealth. As we look back on these early chapters in the history of money, it is clear that gold's ascent as a foundation for monetary systems was neither accidental nor inevitable, but the result of a long evolution. From sacred temples to royal treasuries, from the hands of artisans to the pockets of merchants, gold's path to becoming the standard of value was shaped by the choices and needs of countless generations. And although the gold standard, as it would later be formalized, still lay in the future, the groundwork was set as enduring and unyielding as the metal itself. In the closing decades of the 19th century, a quiet revolution transformed the architecture of global finance. The world's great economies, one by one, tethered their monetary systems to a fixed anchor, gold. This shift, known as the classical gold standard, would underpin the world economy from the 1870s until the eve of the First World War. For nearly half a century, the gold standard was not only a technical arrangement, but also a force that shaped the rhythms of international trade, the stability of currencies, and the expectations of merchants, financiers, and ordinary citizens. At its core, the gold standard was elegantly simple. A country defined its currency as a certain weight of gold and promised, through its central bank or treasury, to exchange paper money for gold at that fixed rate. This guarantee was not merely symbolic. In daily practice, anyone could present banknotes and receive the equivalent amount of gold bullion or coins in return. The United States, for example, defined $1 as a specific weight of gold and maintained this parity through careful stewardship of its reserves. Britain, too, bound the pound sterling to gold, a policy that would become the model for much of the world. The momentum behind the gold standard was neither immediate nor universal. Although England had operated under a de facto gold standard since 1717, thanks in part to Isaac Newton's determination of the gold-to-silver exchange rate, it was only formally adopted in 1819. The United States, meanwhile, gradually shifted from a bimetallic system to a de facto gold standard in 1834, then codified this commitment in law in 1900. The true flowering of the system, however, came in the decades following 1871. Germany's decision to adopt the gold standard that year, in the wake of its unification and newfound status as a European power, proved pivotal. Other nations, recognizing the advantages enjoyed by Britain and Germany in trade and finance, soon followed suit. By the dawn of the 20th century, nearly all countries of economic significance had fixed their currencies to gold or to another currency that did so. Only a handful of outliers remained. The mechanics of the system were both rigid and self-correcting. Domestic currencies were freely convertible into gold, and exchange rates between countries were fixed by the gold content of their respective units of account. If a British pound was defined as a certain weight of gold, and so was the French franc, then the exchange rate between those currencies was determined by the relative weight of gold each represented. This arrangement carried profound implications for international trade and finance. Because exchange rates were stable and predictable, merchants and investors could move capital across borders with unprecedented confidence. The risk of sudden devaluation or currency manipulation was, in theory, eliminated. Balance of payments, adjustments. The perennial challenge of economic relations between countries occurred through the movement of gold itself. When a country ran a trade surplus, gold flowed in to pay for its exports. Conversely, a nation with a trade deficit experienced gold outflows as it paid for more imports than it earned from exports. These gold flows were not simply accounting entries, they had real consequences. An inflow of gold increased the domestic money supply, tending to raise prices and, over time, dampen the competitive edge that had produced the surplus. A deficit, on the other hand, led to a contraction of money and falling prices, which, while painful, eventually made a country's goods cheaper and more attractive to foreign buyers. In this way, the gold standard operated with an automaticity that many found reassuring. Persistent imbalances could not continue indefinitely. The system itself compelled adjustment. Central banks and treasuries played a crucial role as stewards of the standard. Their primary responsibility was to maintain the convertibility of notes into gold and to defend the fixed exchange rate. This sometimes required difficult decisions. If gold reserves dwindled, perhaps because of a run on the currency or an extended trade deficit, a central bank might raise interest rates to attract foreign capital or contract the domestic money supply to stem the outflow. These policies could be painful, triggering recessions or unemployment, but they were seen as necessary sacrifices to uphold credibility. The very discipline required by the gold standard was, for many of its proponents, its greatest virtue. The late 19th and early 20th centuries, roughly 1880 to the outbreak of World War I, are often described as the classical gold standard era. It was a period marked by robust economic growth, the expansion of global trade, and an unprecedented degree of monetary stability. Per capita economic growth across participating nations was very respectable, with average annual rates approaching but not exceeding 2.1%. For the first time, world trade operated on a foundation of predictable exchange rates, and capital could flow freely in search of opportunity. The gold standard was widely credited with fostering an openness to commerce and investment unmatched in previous ages. One of the system's most celebrated features was its provision of a stable, nominal anchor. With currencies tied to gold and gold itself in limited supply, governments found it difficult, if not impossible, to expand the money supply at will. This discipline was thought to guard against runaway inflation and the temptation of deficit spending. In the United States, for example, the government's promise to exchange dollars for gold at a fixed price was seen as a bulwark against inflationary pressures. The credibility of this commitment reassured both domestic and foreign investors, encouraging the flow of capital and the accumulation of reserves. Price stability, in turn, contributed to a sense of predictability that was vital for long-term investment and planning. The effects of the gold standard rippled through every aspect of economic life. International trade flourished under the regime of fixed exchange rates. Merchants could sign contracts, ship goods, and settle accounts without the fear that currency fluctuations would erode their profits or wipe them out entirely. The reduction in exchange rate risk fostered the growth of multinational enterprises and cross-border investment. The world's great financial centers, London, Paris, New York, became ever more deeply interconnected as capital and credit flowed with a speed and certainty never before possible. Yet the gold standard was not without its tensions and limitations. The very mechanisms that promoted stability could also impose harsh discipline. When gold flowed out of a country, shrinking the domestic money supply, the resulting contraction could trigger deflation and unemployment. Policymakers of the age often faced stark choices: defend the gold peg at all costs, or risk undermining confidence in the currency. There was little room for maneuver. The system's automaticity, so praised by its proponents, could in practice be unforgiving. Despite these challenges, the gold standard era is remembered as a time of remarkable economic integration and relative peace. The fixed monetary anchor, combined with the expectation that governments would honor their commitments, fostered an environment in which commerce and investment could thrive. The gold standard did not eliminate business cycles, but it did impose a kind of order on the chaos of international finance. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 marked a profound rupture. To finance the enormous cost of war, governments across Europe and beyond suspended the convertibility of their currencies into gold. The machinery of the gold standard ground to a halt as states printed money to pay for armies and armaments. In the war's aftermath, efforts were made to restore the system, most notably with the brief reintroduction of the gold exchange standard in the 1920s. But the pre-war world of effortless convertibility and open capital flows would not return. The final blow came during the Great Depression, as countries again abandoned gold in a desperate bid to regain control over their economies. Nevertheless, for nearly half a century, the classical gold standard stood as a model of international cooperation and financial discipline. Its benefits, price stability, credibility, and the automatic adjustment of payments became benchmarks against which later systems would be measured. Even after its demise, economists and policymakers continued to look back on the gold standard era, seeking lessons about inflation, monetary efficiency, and the management of shocks to the global economy. What is perhaps most striking about the gold standard is how it reshaped expectations. By making the value of money both predictable and internationally recognized, it encouraged a scale of global integration that would have been unimaginable in earlier times. The gold standard was not simply a technical fix or a policy choice. It was a shared understanding, a commitment by the world's leading nations to bind their fates together through the discipline of gold. That discipline brought both prosperity and hardship, stability and inflexibility, and left a legacy that continues to influence debates about money and power to this day. As the 20th century unfolded, the gold standard would be reimagined, first in the form of the gold exchange standard and later through the Bretton Woods system, which pegged major currencies to the United States dollar and, indirectly, to gold. But the golden age of true convertibility, when paper money could be exchanged for precious metal at the teller's window and the world's economies moved in harmony with the ebb and flow of bullion, remains a singular chapter in the history of money. The lessons of that era, with all their complexities and contradictions, echo still in the debates and dilemmas of modern finance. The story of the gold standard's decline is one of mounting pressures, unexpected crises, and the steady advance of new economic realities. In the era that followed the heyday of fixed gold parities, the familiar anchor that had guided money and trade for decades began to slip away. The old order, which had promised stability through the discipline of gold, found itself unprepared for the shocks of the 20th century. The first and perhaps most overwhelming blow came with the outbreak of World War I. The conflict was unlike any before it, both in scale and in its demands on national treasuries. The gold standard's rules, long regarded as immutable, quickly became an obstacle to the vast expenditures required by total war. Governments suspended gold convertibility, and currencies began to float, untethered from their metallic anchor. This led to a surge of inflation across the combatant nations as money was printed to finance armies and armaments. The war fractured the old system, and even after hostilities ceased, the path to restoration was anything but clear. In the years that followed, efforts to return to gold were plagued by uncertainty and shifting economic realities. The relationship between trade and gold reserves, once so central, became tenuous in the face of systemic changes. Countries struggled with the legacy of wartime debts and the uneven distribution of gold. Attempts to realign reserves and exchange rates were hampered not only by lingering depression, but also by fierce economic competition between the world's great financial powers, particularly the United Kingdom and the United States. The result was a fragile and precarious international monetary landscape. The 1920s saw several nations make hesitant attempts to restore the gold standard, but these efforts were undermined by fundamental weaknesses. The monetary systems that emerged during this period bore little resemblance to the classical gold standard. The gold exchange standard, for example, allowed countries to hold reserves in foreign currencies as well as gold, introducing new layers of complexity and vulnerability. As the decade wore on, underlying tensions grew. Then came the Great Depression. The gold standard, once celebrated for restraining inflation and inspiring confidence, now became a source of rigidity and distress. As economic downturns swept through Europe, gold began to flow out of the United States, draining reserves and triggering declines in money and credit. The system's insistence on maintaining fixed parities forced governments to choose between defending their currency and addressing deepening unemployment and deflation. In 1931, Britain, long the standard-bearer of gold, abandoned convertibility. The United States followed suit in 1933, suspending the exchange of dollars for gold. These decisions marked the end of an era. International deflation and a breakdown in cooperation destroyed what remained of the classical gold standard. For some, the gold standard's collapse was a necessary evil, a sacrifice demanded by unprecedented economic hardship. For others, it was a tragic abandonment of discipline, a step onto the uncertain path of monetary experimentation. The debate was fierce and remained so decades later. Economists such as Friedrich Hayek and Lionel Robbins would later argue that the gold standard, by forcing countries to contract their economies in the face of crisis, had exacerbated the Great Depression. Other scholars contend that the discipline of gold, while admirable in theory, proved too inflexible for a world of rapid change and interconnected risk. In the aftermath of collapse, the world's monetary system entered a period of improvisation. The management of public debt during the war and its aftermath had fundamentally altered the rules of the game. Returning to gold proved not only politically fraught, but economically destabilizing. In moments of acute stress, such as the crisis of 1847 in Britain, the Bank of England had already shown that gold's discipline could be suspended in favor of pragmatic solutions, issuing fiat money to restore confidence and stem the outflow of gold. The United States, after suspending gold convertibility, took decisive steps. In 1934, the government nationalized private gold holdings and raised the official conversion price to $35 an ounce, a move designed to restore confidence and encourage gold inflows. The era of the gold standard had ended, but gold's role in the international system was not yet over. After the devastation of World War II, the world's leaders sought a new framework for stability and growth. The result was the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944, which established a novel compromise. Major currencies would be pegged to the United States dollar, and the dollar itself would be convertible into gold at a fixed rate. The United States, with its enormous reserves and unrivaled economic power, became the linchpin of the new system. For a generation, the Bretton Woods regime provided a measure of order and prosperity, fostering trade and investment across the Atlantic and beyond. Yet the seeds of future upheaval were already sown. The economic boom that followed the war, coupled with the rise of the United States' global commitments, strained the system's foundations. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, the United States was running persistent trade deficits and mounting government expenditures. The rest of the world, flush with dollars, began to question whether the United States could maintain its promise to redeem those dollars for gold at the fixed price. The gold coverage ratio fell, and confidence wavered. In August 1971, President Richard Nixon announced the suspension of dollar-gold convertibility. The so-called Nixon shock reverberated across the globe. With a single stroke, the last vestige of gold's role as the anchor of the monetary system was swept away. The dollar, and by extension all major currencies, became fiat money legal tender, not redeemable for anything but itself, its value established by government decree and market confidence. The Bretton Woods system unraveled entirely by 1973, and the modern era of floating exchange rates began. The transition from gold-backed money to fiat currency was not merely a technical change. It marked the end of a centuries-old relationship between money and metal, and the beginning of a new era in which trust, policy, and perception would determine the value of currencies. For some, this newfound flexibility gave central banks the tools to respond to economic shocks and prevent the kind of deflationary spirals that had haunted the gold standard era. For others, it was an open invitation to inflationary excess and monetary mismanagement. Debate over the gold standard's virtues and failings has persisted ever since. Its proponents argue that tying money to gold imposes discipline, limits the temptation to print away debts, and protects savings from being eroded by inflation. Critics countered that the gold standard's rigidity breeds fragility, making it difficult to respond to crises and forcing unnecessary sacrifice on societies in times of distress. The experience of the Great Depression, in particular, looms large in this debate, serving as both cautionary tale and rallying cry, depending on one's point of view. No country today operates under a gold standard. The appeal, however, is far from extinguished. During periods of high inflation or economic uncertainty, calls for a return to gold resurface, and the metal itself retains a special status in the minds of investors, policymakers, and the public. Central banks continue to hold substantial gold reserves, a legacy of its former role and a hedge against the unknown. Gold's enduring allure as a safe haven is evident in times of crisis, such as the inflationary shocks of the 1970s, the global financial turmoil of 2008, and even the uncertainties of the pandemic era. Its price often rises when faith in paper money wavers, reinforcing its reputation as a store of value outside the reach of governments. The legacy of the gold standard is not merely historical. Its memory shapes the contours of contemporary economic debate, serving as a benchmark for evaluating monetary systems. The question of whether to prioritize price stability, limit government discretion, or provide the flexibility to address unemployment and growth remains unresolved. Some see in the gold standard a lost world of order and predictability, others see a cautionary example of the dangers of inflexibility. Gold itself, stripped of its official monetary role, has evolved into an object of investment and speculation. Modern gold coins are cherished by collectors, and the metal's luster continues to influence global economic policy in subtle ways. The World Gold Council's extensive archives reflect this changing status, tracing gold's journey from universal currency to prized asset and symbol of security. In retrospect, the collapse of the gold standard was not a single moment but a drawn-out process shaped by wars, depressions, and the shifting priorities of nations. The system that had once promised automatic adjustment and self-correcting discipline ultimately gave way to the demands of modern economies, demands for adaptability, growth, and, at times, the ability to act outside the constraints of gold. The transition to fiat currency was perhaps inevitable, given the pressures of the 20th century. Yet the debate it sparked and the memories it evokes continue to shape the way we think about money, trust, and the foundations of economic order. Gold's luster, while diminished in its official role, remains undimmed in the imagination, a reminder of the enduring search for stability in a world of change.